Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and this summer is the 40th anniversary of us playing this game. In 1985, my mom bought me the first edition boxed set of the DC Heroes role playing game by Mayfair Games. And she was the very first game master that we ever had. And while I can tell you that that was for sure the summer of 1985, I'm afraid I can't remember what the exact date was. So I talked about this with our players to see how everybody thought we should handle this. How should we celebrate our 40th anniversary? And our original idea was to do this big event that would last all summer long, and it would start at the beginning of summer and it would end at the end of summer. Um, but the thing is, like, I got to thinking about it, and at least for me, summertime is all about fun. And this story takes some dark turns. So I didn't want to stretch that out. I didn't want all summer long to be like a downer. So instead, we decided to um, run this past weekend. We had old players from over the years play with me over Discord. I met with some people in person. It was, and it was kind of like it was one story over the course of many games, right? And we decided that we wanted the outcome of this event to be the thing that would then be the state of things all summer long, right? And something else I kind of wanted to talk about before we really got into the story, and I've mentioned this before kind of on the podcast, which is that I have this brain tumor and it's inoperable, right? There's nothing they can do about it. Um, on a bad day, it works kind of like Alzheimer's. On a good day, I'm just sort of like mildly inconvenienced. You know what I mean? But I have noticed recently it's getting a little bit worse. So 10 years from now, obviously, would then be the 50th anniversary of the game. And I don't know if we will be playing in 10 years. I don't know if I will be here in 10 years. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be a downer, but the point I'm trying to like arrive at is that it occurred to me that this might be my last chance to really do a really, really big story. You know what I mean? And I mean really big, just like as big as I possibly could. And so I started to wonder, what would that even be? What is like the biggest thing I could do? What have I never done before? And how do we just blow everything out of the water somehow? And so this video that you're listening to right now is the answer. This is what I came up with. So, and I know I say this all the time. Thank you so much for being here. We really do have an awesome community. It really is because of you guys, right? And you guys are awesome. My players, I want to say thank you to all the players who've been playing with me uh for so many years. They're obviously awesome too. Thank you to everybody involved, right? Um, so yeah, without any further ado, let's dive in. Prologue to today's story takes place on Earth K, which has had a rough time of things recently. The moon turned out to be something akin to the Death Star. It was destroyed, but then Earth had no moon. The home planet of the Transformers was moved to where the moon was, but in the process, there were earthquakes and tidal waves, etc. And when the moon dust was knocked off, because we went with this idea that over, because it was there for millions of years, and all the asteroids and stuff that were constantly hitting it were covering it in what we would call moon dust, right? So at one point in that adventure, all the moon dust is kind of knocked off, and that rusty metal can be seen from Earth, and it looks blood red, right? Which, along with the earthquakes, etc., prompted many different religious groups to see this as like an omen that the end was here. And the X-Men had just fought Apocalypse and his four horsemen, right? So that was kind of adding to this kind of panic that the general public had. And a part of the Earth had actually cracked open due to continental drift caused by Cybertron's arrival. And so these Insecticons were like running around everywhere. And so that seemed kind of like one of these plagues, like a plague of locusts kind of a thing. And then, as if a crescendo to all of this, Mephisto was defeated by the combined might of Brainiac, Doctor Doom, Lex Luthor, and Ultron. And then the gates of hell were flung open, which brings us to the main plot of this event. Darkseid, Doomsday, Imperiex, Galactus, Onslaught, Thanos, you name it. Every single villain from 40 years of gaming, every single villain we have ever killed off in our game world, all come back. They're all walking the earth once more, right? And that includes Necron, who wastes no time in sending Black Lantern power rings to the graves of every dead hero from 40 years of gaming, right? And so that includes Golden Age characters like Batman, Captain America, Namor, Superman, etc., right? So things get really bad really quick. So, of course, the modern heroes of Earth K, who tend to be the grandchildren of the originals, find themselves fighting Black Lantern versions of their grandparents. So the current Superman, who is Clark Kent III, he comes to blows with Clark Kent the First, right? Clark Kent Sr. And the son of Huntress is Bruce Wayne the Third. He gets into a fight with Bruce Wayne the First. The sons of American Dream and Spider-Girl are forced to fight Zombie Cap and Spidey, right? And and by the way, as one would expect, Black Lantern Batman has powers that the normal Batman lacks. So the normal Batman, right, Bruce Wayne III, dies only to come back as a Black Lantern. The Punisher, who'd managed to survive this entire time, dies at the hands of his wife, who is now a Black Lantern. And that was heartbreaking. And as the Black Lanterns are just becoming a bigger and bigger problem, the Nova Corps responds to the problem. And they bring a friend with them who is Galactus. And I'm sure this is going to confuse a lot of people, but on Earth K, we actually have two characters who are both named Galactus. In the past, we had the original Galactus, who was Galen of Ta, and he was the source of the cosmic rays that turned Ben, Johnny, Reed, and Sue into the Fantastic Four. Then in 1968, Reed and Sue had a son named Franklin Richards, who grew up in our world, just like in Earth X. Check out those comics if you haven't already. But our version of Franklin grew up to become the second Galactus, right? And he ultimately was transformed into a version called Lifebringer Galactus, which is an idea we got from the comics. Google that if you're unfamiliar with Lifebringer Galactus. Basically, take the normal Galactus and everything on him that's normally purple, you make it gold. Everything that's normally blue, you make that white, right? And so, while our Black Lantern Galactus, who is Galen of Ta, he's all about death, right? He goes up against Lifebringer Galactus, aka Franklin Richards, who is all about life. And Lifebringer Galactus uses his ability to create heralds. And in doing so, his team overwhelms the evil Galactus. Then Lifebringer Galactus squares off against Necron, Lord of the Unliving. There's also a Black Lantern version of Nihilist, who was our main villain from around the year 2000, as well as a Black Lantern version of Zaxxas, who was the big baddie back in 2020 who killed the original John Redbridge. And when the original Redbridge died, his remains were reanimated as a character that we referred to as Zombear. And then likewise, his wife, Mara, became Zamara. So they fight the current John Redbridge and lose. But then everyone else attacks that John Redbridge too. So even John Redbridge, who, when we've done these big events in the past, he's usually the guy that fixes them somehow, right? He dies. And then his physical body gets up again, and now it's a Black Lantern, right? Superman had a ton of sons over the years, right? Like Clark Jr., Joel, John, Jor, Hal, Larry, Lyle, etc. All of them are Black Lanterns now. And everybody but Clark Jr. has that pre-crisis Superman power level, right? So these guys start to mow down the Nova Corps left and right. And of course, the dead Nova Corps members become Black Lanterns, right? So everything is spiraling out of control until finally there is a blinding white light. When they killed John Redbridge, his soul went to heaven, where it merged with the soul from the other John Redbridge. And this gets really complicated, but we said that if you have a character from two different timelines, it still only had one soul. So as a result, if we've done a retcon here or there, the souls actually have the memories from both timelines, right? Which is more or less the case with John Redbridge. And the point is that now there is one unified John Redbridge who remembers everything that has ever happened to any of the John Redbridges from Earth K. That's the bottom line. So the gates of heaven open up, and the first person who steps out is the pre-crisis Superman, the original Clark Kent the first from the Golden Age, right? Who in our world was still fighting crime in the 50s and 60s, and he became that really, really powerful Superman. And he looks like a more muscular version of the Christopher Reeve version of the character that I grew up with. So he steps through this blinding white portal and he smiles at this army of undead characters. And he says, "This looks like a job for Superman." And then stepping through right behind him is the Adam West Batman, right? And he wastes no time throwing a batarang at the Joker, who is just escaped from hell itself, right? Captain America throws a shield. Spider-Man slings a web. Everyone who has ever died in my game is all back, and the battle is massive. Daredevil is here, by the way, and he can see again. And the reason we went with that was we had this idea that in heaven, nobody would be like um, ill or anything like that. So, like, if you were like missing a body part, like say Nick Fury had two good eyes when we saw a young Nick Fury show up. And like nobody is old, that's another thing. So characters who had become elderly or whatever, they are young again, like the Punisher. It also means that the characters who died already can't die now because we went with this idea that they're kind of like a soul, right? But they're solid. And we're going to, because I know there's a lot of complicated concepts here, we're going to unpack this in the weeks to come, okay? But point being, this was the biggest, longest battle we have ever had in 40 years of gaming. Lex Luthor is in power armor. He punches the original Superman. Spider-Man webs up the Green Goblin who's just escaped from hell, on and on. And John Redbridge is back. And this is like the unified, every John Redbridge is back into being one guy, right? And he finds the nearest bar and he walks through the door. But instead of entering that bar, he enters the Continuum Bar and Grill because it wouldn't be a game this time of year. Usually at the beginning of summer, we start running CB&G games, right? Because we love the Continuum Bar and Grill. It's a tiki bar. It feels like summer. Those adventures are normally very lighthearted. So we just associate the two. And for anybody who is maybe new to the channel or something like that, you have no idea what the Continuum Bar and Grill is. The idea is that, think of it this way. Think of it as it has a magic bar door. And so you can walk into any place in any dimension or any year, right? And the bar door of the CB&G will summon you into the CB&G from where you were, right? So if you try to walk into your local Applebee's or TGI Fridays or any place that serves alcohol, right? BW3s, whatever, you end up in the CB&G instead, right? And obviously, not every time. There's like a 1 in a million chance it happens at random. That's usually how people go there for the first time. But then once they know how it works, you can leave. And if you just think about, like, I want to go home, you will walk out of your local bar. You'll be back in your own dimension. You'll be back in your own time period. You know what I mean? So that's how it works. And so John Redbridge, this is his bar, right? He's very familiar with how the bar door works. So he enters the CB&G and then he turns around and he walks back out. But instead of thinking, I want to go back to my home, you can pick another year, you can pick another dimension, right? Stuff like that. So when he walks out of the bar door, he goes to the negative universe. And we've talked about the Negaverse in other games where the idea is we ripped off the concept and the terminology from Darkwing Duck. So that a lot of our player characters, if one of our guys wears, say, green, the opposite color of green is red, and then he has a counterpart there that wears red and is like an evil version of the guy who's normally a hero in our main game, right? So the point is, Redbridge goes to the Negaverse, but he goes to their version of the future, right? He goes 1,000 years into the future. And the reason he does that is he finds the heroic version of this character called the Time Trapper. And so Redbridge tells him that he needs help. This time trapper is a hero and he's happy to, help others. He's very selfless. Um, they go back to Earth K, but instead of coming to the modern day, then they go into the past. And again, they're using the bar door to do this. And they go to earlier stuff from my podcast that I've mentioned, and a lot of you are going to be familiar with, which is the time period when John Redbridge had the Infinity Gems. And he has the time trapper copy the Infinity Gems in the exact same way that the time trapper once created the SW6 version of the Legion of Superheroes. And that's another thing I'm happy to explain. So the way we always say it is, imagine if there is like this book about your life, a metaphorical book, right? And that every page in this book represents a single moment in your life. So the idea is that the time trapper can tear out a page from your book, but you're fine. If you're missing this moment, you don't even notice it because you have all the other moments. All the pages before it are still there, all the pages after it are still there. You don't even know he took it from you, right? And then he can take that metaphorical page and he can kind of breathe life into it, right? And it's sort of like the clone of you, but it really is you. It is really you from that moment, right? So so he does that, right? But he does it to the Infinity Gems. And so they are really the Infinity Gems. And this was done to John Redbridge once, and it created a teenage version of him. And we called that character the Celtic Guardian. But he could never grow up, he could never get older because he was always the way he was in that moment of his life, right? And then later, at one point, he died in an adventure. And so we did the Groundhog thing day, excuse me, the Groundhog Day thing where he just sort of wakes up in bed the next morning and is like, whoa, what was that about? And we said he can't die because he wasn't dead in that moment. Does that make sense? Um, so that said, up until now, the way we've ran the Infinity Gems of Earth K, and there were some comics where this is how Marvel handled it. The GM at the time was a guy named Howard Warnes, so he was doing what he had read in a comic, right? And then there's other times when they do it a different way, and that's the case with a lot of these things. I know a lot of people are going to want to chime in on this adventure and say, "Hey, this violates this or that or whatever." Unfortunately, the comic books themselves don't always line up, right? And when all else fails, just remember this is Earth K. It's not Earth 616. It's not Earth 1 from DC. It's Earth K. So this is how it works on our Earth. Um, but the way we ran it was that if you take our version of the Infinity Gems to a different dimension, like Earth H or Earth 1 or Earth 616 or whatever, they will quit working. They break, right? They die, in other words, because fun fact, there was a seventh gem called the Ego Gem, and when you put all seven together, it actually creates a female character named Nemesis. A lot of people don't know that. But so we literally, the phrasing we use is that the gems die if you take them to another dimension, right? But these gems are unkillable in the same way that the Celtic Guardian was unkillable, right? Do you see what I'm saying there? Because it was a moment out of the gem's existence. They are always going to be functional because they were functional in that moment. You see what I'm saying? So using these gems, John Redbridge, returns. He goes back to where all this started, where the massive battle is. and he faces off against his old arch enemy, Necron. And we were using Necron as the main villain in our game for years, for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years or something, before DC did the whole Blackest Night thing, right? So these two have been arch enemies in our game, like, for the long haul, you know what I mean? And so once again, they're fighting. And so out of habit, Redbridge opens with an energy blast. And because the Infinity Gems have him all powered up, this blast does infinite damage. But the thing is, Necron is already dead, right? And so we took all the characters. I can't remember if I said this already or not. We took all the characters who, for instance, came back from hell, like Necron, and we gave all of them just infinite APs of the invulnerability power. So the idea there is when you take them into the negatives, the invulnerability kicks in and it pushes them back up into the positives again, right? And we're kind of going with this idea of, like, you can't kill someone who's already dead. Think of it like trying to shoot a ghost or something like that, right? So at any rate, that doesn't work. So then the second thing that Redbridge does is he subs his infinite APs of Omnipower for regeneration usable on others. And that's actually how he defeated Necron. That was the whole reason why Necron's soul was in hell to begin with, right? But that process altered Necron, right? He's not quite the same now. Just like, like the Joker, you can't just kill him. If you give him the electric chair, he's going to get up again and keep going because he's already dead, right? So the regeneration usable on others thing isn't actually working on Necron this time. So Redbridge, like I said, he has the memories of every Redbridge we've ever talked about on my channel. And one of them was a Green Lantern who had encountered Necron when he was imprisoned in this other dimension. And so Necron couldn't escape from that dimension when he was alive. Redbridge gambles that dying probably didn't give Necron dimension travel for some reason, right? Because if he could do that, he would have left hell a long time ago, before Doctor Doom and Lex Luthor turned him loose. Which, by the way, their goal was to recover the soul of Doom's mother. And we're going to talk about that later too. But at any rate, so Redbridge puts Necron back into that old dimension from the very beginning and imprisons him. And then once he does that, and the central power battery of the Black Lantern Corps is destroyed, the Black Lantern rings all run out of gas, basically, right? And the ring has to reanimate a dead body. So those bodies cease to be reanimated and they just go back to being dead bodies, right? And the Batmen all team up. And so now we've got Bruce Wayne the First from the Golden Age. We've got the second Batman for us was Dick Grayson, who was the Golden Age Robin. He was our Batman in 1966. His sidekick, by the way, his Robin was Bruce Wayne Jr. Um, and then we've got Bruce Wayne the Third, who is actually the son of the Huntress, who is our current Batman, right? Um, they all gang up on the Joker. They win, and the Joker is put behind bars. And that's kind of where a lot of this was going too, is characters might be unkillable, but the classic DC Heroes thing is like, DC Heroes doesn't actually want you killing the bad guys. They just want the bad guys locked up. You don't get any experience points if you kill the bad guys in DC Heroes. So this is kind of reinforcing that idea. This is reinforcing the idea of classic, iconic superheroes from the old days that were not as grimdark as a lot of stuff these days is. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, the Joker ends up in Arkham Asylum. Doomsday picked a fight with the Superman family, and boy, was that a bad idea because all the Superman related characters I mentioned in this video are all alive now by the end of everything, right? And so they all defeat Doomsday. Um, and Powerhouse, the Gold Lantern, is reunited with Pulsar and Umbra, who were his best friends. And those were the games I played in high school that I loved dearly. And over the years, we had killed off Pulsar and Umbra. So they're back, right? Every dead player character from the long history of the game, they're all back. And they're all young and they're all healthy, so on and so forth. And that brings us to the epilogue. Everybody works together and they start to fix Earth K. In recent months, it had a lot happen to it, but the heroes team up and they do what needs done. Those huge metal chunks of the old moon are carried off into space. Destroyed buildings are rebuilt at super speed. Um, and with the powers of the Infinity Gems and the White Lantern Ring, John Redbridge turns deserts into gardens, growing enough food to feed everybody on Earth. And for the first time in a really long time, we get what feels like a happy ending. And that was it. That's how we celebrated the 40th anniversary of our game. I always had a rule to never bring back the dead. But I thought of this as sort of the last big hurrah. So I figured I'd make an exception to my rule. Needless to say, my players were pretty happy. This opens up a lot of possibilities for them in terms of getting a second chance to play someone that they maybe cared a lot about in the past, and maybe just something like a bad roll of the dice literally ruined a story that they had been really invested in. So now all those stories get another chapter. So, speaking of stories, we hope that you liked this one. If so, as always, we would love it if you chose to support our humble little channel by smashing that like button. Make sure you're subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you and not tell you about it. And leave us a comment. And of course, thank you for being here. Whether you are a current player, a former player, a listener, a future player, whatever, thank you guys for being here. We are here because of you. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.